to this episode of the Tennis IQ podcast. I'm Brian Lomax.
And I'm Josh Berger. And in this episode, we'd like to discuss the Australian Open, which just wrapped up. We had Naomi Osaka and Novak Djokovic as the winners, as the champions. And we'd like to dive in first to the women's tournament. Brian, I know you have a few quotes that will get our conversation started. But again, we see Naomi Osaka as the champion. She's now 4-0 in finals, having a very impressive record, even if the actual quality of the final at times wasn't the highest level. I know one thing I'd like to add right away is from hearing her press conference after the final, where she acknowledged that she was feeling nervous beforehand, and they asked her, why do you feel nervous? Where Jennifer Brady, it's her first final. Where is that coming from? She said, to be honest, I'm not sure. It matters a lot to me. I view it as a great opportunity. And I was feeling nervous. So she said, I was feeling nervous. I knew maybe I wasn't going to play my best tennis, but reminded herself that the other player, her opponent, Brady, would also be nervous, and that she just had to try to, do what she could, point in, point out, and not focus too much about the result, which I think is a great mindset. So just wanted to throw that in the beginning. But Brian, I think you have a few quotes to get us started.
Yeah, although I would like to hit on what you just said, Josh, because it's very reminiscent of Iga Swiatek and keep expectations low and standards high. So,
Yep.
And maybe in this case, it was more about keeping expectations realistic. I may not play well, and that's sometimes an expectation that tennis players bring to matches that isn't always fulfilled, and that can become problematic. I also think, the question about, well, why are you nervous? Because it's, Brady's first final is a little bit, not that it isn't fair, but isn't quite complete in that it's not a binary thing. Like, oh, she's nervous, therefore I'm not. And as you said, Osaka, it's important to her. And one of the quotes that I wanted to discuss was with respect to that. So she said, and I think this would be a great one for us to discuss, her approach to finals was this: I have this mentality that people don't remember the runners up. I fight the hardest in the finals. I think that's where you sort of set yourself apart. And I think it's a really good perspective. Not necessarily that people don't remember the runners up, or like there's anything bad about being a runner up in a tournament, because obviously it's a great accomplishment, and for someone like Jennifer Brady, it's a step for her. On hopefully we see her on this stage much more often. But the idea of fighting the hardest in the finals is really, I think, a great perspective, because how might other players look at it? They may be thinking about how that perhaps will fail on this big stage, or they don't want to lose, or they don't want to play badly, etc. They might be thinking about, again, expectations. What will everybody think if this type of thing happens? But you can really start to put that behind you when you have this attitude of, hey, this is the finals. This is the time to fight the hardest. This is the time to set myself apart. And what have we seen now with Naomi Osaka? She's 4-0 in her first 4 Grand Slam finals, equaling a record only held by Monica Seles and Roger Federer, that's impressive company. And she actually recognized that that's impressive company.
Yeah, I mean, very, very impressive company for sure. I think that quote that you bring up to me reminds me a lot of the famous Billie Jean King quote: "The pressure is a privilege."
Yeah.
Right. Where there's 2 ways you can view this moment. You're in the final. Either you're going to lean in and really relish the moment, relish this opportunity, view it as a privilege to be there, and view it as a chance to really showcase your skill set, and a great opportunity to win another Grand Slam, or back away from it and say, what if I lose here? What is everybody going to think? That would be so disappointing. That would be such a big upset. So to me, I think her 4-0 record demonstrates that mindset that she has developed over the years. And we were talking offline, but it hasn't always been that way. Where just even a couple of years ago, 2019, before she won, her first major at the U.S. Open, she was very shy, very reserved in press conferences or on-court interviews. So she really has developed into this champion and really this champion's mentality. The other thing I would add, which I think is important for tennis players of any level, is that, I mean, if the number one, if the best player in the tournament, if the champion can acknowledge these nerves, can feel these nerves, then it just demonstrates that everybody goes through this at times. But what's important is to be able to acknowledge it and then not feeling like you have to act on it, not feeling, okay, I feel nervous. This is going to be a tough day today. This is going to be really rough, but okay, what can we do about it? Yeah, right. Can we change up those expectations and remind ourselves that the opponent will feel nervous too? Can we, maybe it has something to do with shifting our game plan a little bit. Maybe we're a really aggressive player and we just add a little bit more spin or a little bit more margin to our shots. Maybe we recommit to really moving our feet and really, doing the little things right that ultimately can make that difference between winning and losing. Or we put, as we've talked about here before, we put a little note in our bag as a little reminder of some of these things we want to be focused on, knowing that we might be a little nervous and we might not have those things at the forefront of our minds because of those nerves. So I think those are a couple of strategies. Working with players, having some sort of reminder, recommitting to moving our feet a little bit more, recommitting to having a positive mindset regardless of those sorts of nerves, and a realistic mindset as well about our performance. I think she has really developed into that champion. And I think that quote and some of these other ones really demonstrate that.
I think you're right about the whole nerves thing. It's fine to accept it, accept that you're feeling nervous, but it doesn't mean you have to act that way, right? And you gave some good strategies there. I think we discussed that theme a little bit as well when we talked about Novak Djokovic in an earlier episode about how he had doubting thoughts in the 2019 Wimbledon final against Federer.
Yep.
Yeah, and which showed, hey, he's human too. He's the number one player in the world, but yet he still had doubts, just like all of us. So it's good for us to understand that these great players are also human. And we have seen Naomi Osaka really develop in front of us with these, a couple more quotes here to share, but she's developing sort of this almost like unflappable approach to how she plays, especially in the big moments. And this next quote I want to share really shows that she gets the mental game, especially with respect to tennis. So this was, she is referring to something that she thought late in the first set of the final after Jennifer Brady made a forehand error on a short ball, a ball that she wouldn't normally miss, especially a player of her level. And so Osaka said, "My mind just began thinking that she was either really nervous or really pressured, and I should capitalize on that by trying to win as many games as I could pace-wise. Because I feel like once a person loses the first set, doubts start to creep in, so that's when you really should put your foot on the gas." And I think there's a lot to learn there from how do we approach the beginning of the second set. I think, in my opinion, that is one of the critical moments of any match, is how you handle that. Whether you've won the first set or lost it, you want to make sure that, let's look at this scenario where we've won the first set. This is not a time to relax. This is a time, as Naomi Osaka said here, to begin to put some distance between you and the opponent. And you do that by keeping your foot on the gas, trying your best to get off to that big lead, because then what do you do to your opponent's mental game? Depending on the level of the player, you may get them to mentally tap out if you get a 3-0 or a 4-0 lead, and you just kind of just finish the set. Doesn't always happen, but Osaka did get off to a 4-0 lead. That did shrink, but I think Brady said essentially it was a little too late. She started playing better. So I'm curious what you thought of that perspective, Josh.
Yeah. We had an earlier episode, actually one of our first episodes, where we talked about stages of a set, stages of a match. And I like that you're pointing out this quote and the importance of the beginning of the second set, because I think it really can be a difference maker. Where after the first set ended, one player won it, and then the match is going to go one of two directions. Either if that same player continues their lead, maybe goes up a break early on, the second set can be quick. If the beginning of the second set is competitive, if the player who lost the first set is leading in the beginning of the second set, the match can turn into a really close match. I would also point to a player that I think really capitalized on the beginning of the second set in a bit of a different way, and his name is John McEnroe. Oftentimes he would win a set, and maybe he would go down in the beginning of the second set, and all of a sudden there would be something would happen. He would have some sort of outburst, or there would be a line call that he would argue, and all of a sudden he's arguing with the line judge, and neither player has hit a ball for 5 minutes. And then what happens? That opposing player's momentum that they drummed up from those first couple games of the second set is gone, and John McEnroe turns the set around and wins it. So not that it would always happened at that time, but there were definitely some key moments when it did. So I think a lot of players ought to recognize the beginning of the second set as a really pivotal time to either, if you want it, okay, let's keep our foot on the gas here. Let's really create some distance. Let's, turn this match into more lopsided in the beginning of the set. Or on the other side of things, if you lost it, okay, let's regroup. Maybe we have to change up our strategy a little bit here, but this beginning of the set is pivotal. So just wanted to add that in.
Yeah, and not that I don't think you're advocating that players manufacture
No.
controversies, right? But what did it do? It ended up, putting some time in there to help break your opponent's momentum. So I think your point is well taken. That as a player, we have to be aware of these streaks or periods of momentum on one side of the court or the other, and how do we maintain or how do we break those things, so that we can get, either continue our lead or get back into the match is good. So yeah, I thought this was really well stated by Osaka about that approach to the second set. I think that's something that we all can practice more. The next quote that I had from Osaka was the reason I wanted to talk about it was it's taking essentially a thought that's not productive, not helping her win. And then she talks about how she was able to change it, basically erase it and come up with a new mindset, a new perspective that helped her get more focused in the moment, the present moment. So this was when she was playing Serena. We all know that's, from Serena's serve is one of the best serves in the history of women's tennis, maybe all of tennis, and not easy to break. And so this is what Osaka said. She said, I had all these thoughts about how she's the best server. I'm probably not going to be able to break her. Then I told myself to erase those thoughts. And just to in a way, I was telling myself, I don't care because I can only play 1 point at a time. So essentially, she put Serena's reputation as a great server aside, say, I don't care about that. And let's just play 1 point at a time. And I think that's bringing it back down to the present moment, bringing it back down to something you can control. Again, like if we talk about keeping our standards high, she decided to do that. She wasn't having these sort of expectations of, this would have been a negative expectation. I can't break her. Getting rid of that, having more realistic expectation of 1 point at a time. Now I can bring my best self to each point. That gives me a chance now to be able to break her. So curious about your thoughts on that one, Josh.
Yeah, I think a lot of players of all levels have the tendency to build players up and almost give them the halo effect. And it's easy to do with somebody like Serena Williams, who has 23 Grand Slam titles, is arguably the greatest women's or just greatest tennis player of all time, greatest, up there with the greatest athletes of all time, I would say. So it's very easy to put the halo on and say that, there's no way I can break this serve. She's going to be serving aces and sort of set these unrealistic standards or expectations rather, for her. And I think a lot of players at the club level, at all sorts of levels, do this, where maybe they see a player who has a higher UTR or a higher ranking than them, and they say, "Oh, in order for me to play them, I'm going to have to play unbelievably well. I'm going to have to make all of my shots." Where in reality, everybody has those ebbs and flows. Everybody has their better days and their worst days. There are upsets all the time, as we know. So not hyping somebody up too much where you're putting them up on the pedestal to the extent that your self-belief is compromised, I would say, is important. Where, okay, we want to respect everybody, but fear nobody, right? So yes, should that serve be respected? Absolutely. But not hyping it up to the point where we don't believe that we have a chance to return it. So I would agree that quote also demonstrates her maturity and having the right strategy, really, in terms of handling that sort of weapon on the other side of the net.
Yeah, because we don't want to lose the match in the locker room.
Right.
We don't want to over respect, and I think that's what you're talking about. And many of us, at where we are in our careers, at the club level or even a more competitive level, we're not at the ATP or WTA level. It's easy to get sucked into that way of thinking. I actually have a former doubles partner, a great friend of mine. I've never seen anybody better at believing he could beat anyone than this guy. And because of that, and he's not a big dude. But he's tenacious. He's won gold balls at the national level in singles and doubles and mixed doubles. He had a fantastic college career. And he just always has this mentality. It doesn't matter who he's playing, that he believes he can win. And often does. And if you were to look at him physically, you wouldn't think that he is this great tennis player, because he's, I'm 5'7"3/4", maybe. He's a little bit shorter than I am. So he's certainly not a physically imposing guy, but mentally, one of the best competitors I've ever encountered. And I know in some of the matches that he and I played together, it was his self-belief, I think, that, became contagious and helped me play better. So, when we maybe transition to the men's side, I think that is a theme that we want to get into a little bit, is that self-belief piece. But getting back to Osaka's quote, I think it's great to be able to, again, recognize an unproductive thought. And, if we touch on our mindfulness episode, this is something that actually mindfulness can help us with, is to notice what our thoughts are, to not necessarily have to be those thoughts, but hey, I just thought this. Is that really helpful? No, it's not. And she was able to transition it, whether we call that thought stopping or thought replacement, whatever. She was able to transition herself from something not productive to something that enabled her to be more focused on what she needed to do. So I thought that was really fantastic on her part. So Josh, should we dive in a little bit more onto the men's side?
Yeah, that sounds good.
So I think you might have more thoughts on this than me, but is there a particular men's match that maybe it was the final, but maybe it was another match that struck you that had some good mental toughness themes to discuss?
I think there's a couple different ones. I mean, I think unfortunately, I'm a Rafa fan. I think, Brian, you
Yes.
are as well. So his match against Tsitsipas, I think was an example of that, where Rafa, as we all know, is one of the greatest champions of the sport, and was up 2 sets, and then in the third set, was playing quite well in the tiebreaker up until a certain point when a couple of key mistakes caused the set to slip away. And then Nadal lost the fourth set. And then the fifth set, they were both going back and forth, trading holds, 1-all, 2-all, 3-all, 4-all, 5-all. And then at 5-all, Nadal played a sloppier game, I guess you could say, where I believe it was 4 unforced errors. And in the 5-6 game, Nadal did fight back, and it was a long deuce game. Nadal was ahead in that game, but I think it goes to show that even, and we talked about not putting players on a pedestal, but not feeling like just because the top guys, we talk about the big three, or on the women's side, Serena, Osaka recently, just because these players have won so many matches, they're not unbeatable. They do have these blips that can be capitalized on. And I think, it goes to show that if you can hang with somebody long enough, and Tsitsipas was able to do that, he hung tough through that tiebreak, ended up winning the tiebreak, all took it to the fifth set, and then it's anybody's game at a certain point. So that's one thing I would touch on. And yeah, I mean, another thing, and it's not particularly from one match, but the Russian qualifier, Karatsev, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, he had some great quotes. Perhaps we can put a link to his press conference that just shows his self-belief. And I mean, he's a qualifier. I believe this was his first Grand Slam main draw. And the run that he had was just, I mean, to make it to a Grand Slam semi in his first Grand Slam tournament is just unbelievable. And he talks about him and his coach, that self-belief piece, right? Just believing every day that that you can reach those highest levels, and working hard despite the challenges. I know he had some injuries, and just so that's another theme I would go for, that having the faith we just talked about in our last episode, the trusting the process, right? Yeah. Having faith that process will pay off, where you're working hard day in, day out, and maybe you're not always seeing the rewards. You don't always have feedback like a Grand Slam to draw on, but having faith that work that you're putting in, day out, is leading somewhere, that it ultimately will pay dividends. So those are two things that definitely stand out. And I know we'll definitely touch on Djokovic and his victory and his title, which was very impressive considering all that he was dealing with. But I'll start with those two themes.
I think with the Nadal match, this would be total speculation on our part, and so I think we'll preface that, because he didn't necessarily say anything in his press conference, I don't believe, that indicated what he might have been thinking or why he played such a bad game, or even his tiebreaker as well in the third set didn't go the way he wanted to. And as you said, he did fight back, but the one thing he did mention was something about another sort of not bad luck, but sort of a bad experience in Australia. And he's had some tough losses.
Yep.
There. The 5-hour, 53-minute final against Djokovic. He hurt his back against Wawrinka that one year, although Wawrinka was amazing and probably could have won anyway. The loss to Federer in 5 sets in 2017. So he's had some tough breaks, and I wonder if that part of that was weighing on his mind, especially as his back was bothering him earlier in the tournament. He did not use that as an excuse. He never does with these things, but it did appear that in that match he was more fatigued than you would normally see. Like, he looked a little bit more tired, where Tsitsipas was like amazingly energized. And as the day that we're recording this particular episode, we learned that Nadal is pulled out of a tournament, citing the back as still being problematic. And as Josh, you pointed out, he's got to save himself for the quest for 21 at Roland Garros. Right.
Absolutely.
So we don't know really what happened with Nadal there, but again, it's the top players, they can also have these blips. And Tsitsipas was able to at least mentally keep himself in the match long enough, um, and he was able to extract a win in the end. So I thought that was good. Um, Karatsev, I think that is an amazing run. We occasionally will see something like this. And I was watching one of his matches. I think he was playing, Felix Auger Aliassime, and Felix is up 2 sets to love, and that's when I turned it off. And I wake up the next day, and I was sort of like, what? Because he didn't look that great. He was making a ton of mistakes. Felix looked awesome, and looked like a pretty routine match. And obviously, things changed at a certain. But I would love to talk about Medvedev and Djokovic because they had a little bit sort of different runs to the final. Medvedev looked like the best player in the world by far. The way he was playing, beating everyone, hitting some like that. I don't know if you saw that, Josh, that backhand down the line against Tsitsipas.
Oh yeah,
What an amazing shot, right?
unreal.
And at a clutch moment too, because he needed that to essentially win the match, the next game, I think. And Djokovic maybe a little bit more of a struggle there, having some injury issues, his body not feeling great. But in the end, it seemed like same old story. Um, Djokovic, difficult first set, but pretty routine after that. And it just, if we bring it back to that theme that you brought up earlier, but I think is really important here, is self-belief in a final. And this isn't Medvedev's first, right? He played in the U.S. Open final against Nadal, so he's played in a final before. But did he have enough self-belief to beat, at the time, 8-time champion Novak Djokovic? In a place that he doesn't often lose. And you'd have to say the evidence would suggest that he didn't believe enough in that match. And as the match went on, his composure corrupted a bit. I'm not like he went into a meltdown or anything, but he certainly wasn't the same player he had been in his previous matches, really the past few months as well. And a study on mental toughness that I know we've cited before in this podcast talked about some of the important attributes that elite athletes believe is part of mental toughness. And one of them is this unshakable, and that's the key word, unshakable self-belief in your ability to win and in your ability to achieve your goals. And tennis obviously is an extremely difficult sport mentally. It does challenge your self-belief constantly. And I'm wondering if Medvedev's belief was just shaken enough in that match to make a difference.
It seemed like it. I mean, as you mentioned, Djokovic at the time had 8 Australian Open titles. The other thing is he was 8-0 in Australian Open finals. So I think, to me, it seems like the first set was sort of the turning point, where after that first set, Medvedev maybe didn't believe that he could come back and that he could still hang with Djokovic. I mean, I think what Djokovic does so well is the defense that he's able to play, where, I mean, among other things, but he's able to essentially neutralize some of Medvedev's biggest weapons, like his serve, like his offense, or the way that he covers the court, where those biggest weapons end up becoming not as effective. So to me, it was really that first set, which I believe was 7-5, and then after that, it seemed like the self belief went away. And I think it's also tough for players to make that breakthrough and win that first slam, especially when they've been in a couple finals before. We saw it with Agassi, we saw it with Andy Murray, and plenty of other examples as well, where maybe they've been in that position a few times, but it can be tough to make that breakthrough, especially on the men's side right now, how the big three, Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic, are just so dominant, have just put so much space between themselves and everybody else. So I think, especially when you're facing one of them in a final, it's couldn't be tougher. And Medvedev now has faced Nadal and Djokovic in finals. I mean, one other thing I'd add is I was talking to a friend during the U.S. Open final, which was the men's final between Thiem and Zverev, and he said that we really have taken it for granted how well the big three handle these moments, how well they handle the finals, how well they're able to bring out their best tennis despite the nerves of playing in a final. And when we saw Thiem and Zverev, struggling with their nerves, struggling with their serves as well. That I think that demonstrated it, and I think for Medvedev to be in that high pressure moment against somebody like Djokovic, who's been there time and time again, especially in the Australian Open, which is the tournament he's had the most success. I think it's a very challenging situation, and I think it showed, especially after that first set when he lost it. I think it was a very tough uphill battle from there.
Yeah, I mean Djokovic, as you mentioned, he's great at taking his opponent's weapons away,
Yep.
and it's almost like when he does that, he more or less establishes residence in your head, and it's hard to get him out because you don't know what to do, and he breaks you mentally by doing that. I mean, there was a period there, maybe a couple of years, where I thought he was completely in Nadal's head. Nadal had no idea what to do against him, and that was even coming out in clay court matches. He couldn't deal with it, and so I think there's a good lesson there as well. Is how do we, as tennis players, when we look at our opponent, how do we take our opponent's best part of their game away? Because very often, if you do take the best part of their game away, it affects their mental game as well. We were talking before we started to record that Medvedev had been averaging something like 3 to 4 aces per set, and Djokovic completely took that away. He wasn't getting any free points off the serve there. And so when you're playing somebody like that, it obviously becomes very frustrating. That builds up, and then that's where, if we're not careful, we lose the composure. I wonder if let's say, Josh, we could have consulted with Daniil before the match. Could we have prepared him for some of those things, like to look, you know what, don't expect to get a lot of aces today, right? Like in terms of keeping some expectations lower, realistic. Expect the points to need to be longer against him. How do we take some of the things that he does really well away, or how do we, tap into what frustrates Novak? Because it's not like that hasn't happened before, right? There are ways to do it. So would some of that maybe have helped a player like Daniil Medvedev deal with that? Maybe not. Maybe, who knows? It just didn't seem like he was really mentally ready to have some of that stuff go away, because we would expect, I think, like you were saying, a player of his caliber to not go away after one set in a major final, right? If we go back to like even what Naomi Osaka said, I don't know. Again, we're speculating maybe a bit, but did we see him fight his hardest in that final? Not sure. Maybe credit to Djokovic for shattering his fortress of mental toughness. But would we have expected more of a fight out of a Federer or Nadal after a one-set deficit? Yeah, I don't think we would have seen either of those players capitulate in the same way. So that's something, I guess, for him to go back and think about as an experience. He'll be back. His game is way too good. Though some of the shots he hits are ridiculously good. I don't know that you could teach anybody to play the way he does. But it's a unique game. It's a cool game to watch. We definitely want to see him back. But it really just speaks to how good those top three guys are. Yeah, when Murray was up there, the four. Because, that U.S. Open final, as you mentioned, and I remember we had Bill Tim on, he found it to be, I think, an embarrassing display for those younger players to play that badly in a major final. And yeah, it wasn't good tennis. It was certainly dramatic at the end, but maybe not the kind of drama we want to see.
No, sometimes people will, I'll talk about that match and people and they'll say, "Oh, what a great match!" It was 5 sets, went to a fifth set tiebreak, and I just say I couldn't disagree more.
Yeah.
That the quality of the match was tough to watch at moments. Honestly, I mean, obviously easier for us to say from our the comfort of our homes than actually being out there. In Arthur Ashe in a fifth set of a Grand Slam final, but no, I think I think it shows that, like, again, I think it shows how impressive what the big three have done, based on how everybody else or how people generally handle those moments. The other thing I'd say as it relates to Medvedev is I was surprised by it because of his first Grand Slam final when he played Nadal. Nadal won those first 2 sets, and Medvedev came roaring back, winning the third and fourth and playing a very competitive fifth set. So, no,
Yeah.
I
Although
think
in that match, didn't you also have the feeling at some points Medvedev wasn't really playing great, but it was like just ripping shots. They happened to go in, and he kind of lucked his way into winning like the third set, and then he finds himself in the fifth, and he's
right.
sort of
That's
mentally
yeah,
back into it. It was a good fifth set, but yeah, you're right. I think he took a different approach when he went down those 2 sets to Nadal than he did against Djokovic. And you know what? Maybe it's just all credit to Djokovic for how well he destroyed Daniel's game.
yeah, and I mean, especially I think the other thing to talk about with Djokovic is earlier in the tournament, it was tough to imagine him winning it.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, he's won now 9 times. It was 8 times. It was 8 times then, but he had a very significant injury. I believe it was a muscle tear during his match against Taylor Fritz, which won 5 sets. To the point where he wasn't. He even said after the match, "I'm not even sure if I'm going to be able to walk on court in the next match." So, no, I mean, the way that he was able to get his body and mind to the place where he could compete and ultimately win the tournament by winning however many more matches were after that. I think four or so, 4 or 5 matches after that, as cannot be understated. To be able to withstand an injury like that and get yourself to a place where you can still win a Grand Slam is very, very impressive.
Yeah. And, much as we talk about Nadal winning, 13 Roland Garros and so forth, is there really anything stopping Djokovic from, you know, getting to similar numbers with his Australian Open titles?
Right, right. Especially now that there's no more line judges, so nothing.
So he won't be getting tossed for that anymore, right? Yeah, that was interesting, and I think it certainly now there's really no challenge system, and
Right.
um, yeah, that's perhaps a topic for another episode. But
Yeah.
yeah, overall, I think it was a good tournament. There were definitely some great moments to watch, especially from a mental toughness and sports psych perspective. A lot more things that went on in that event than we got to today. But I think we've come to a good, probably good conclusion with that. Or any other things in the men's side that you wanted to go over, Josh?
Um, Not really. I mean, I think Rublev um, is definitely a player to look out for. I think the way that he competes, I know he was, I think, struggling physically when he played Medvedev, and that wasn't his best performance. He looked unstoppable before that. I guess one thing I would add in, it's not particular to the men's or the women's side, it's just the tournament in general. Um, and we didn't mention this, a lot of the players, I think 70 something players before the tournament were in quarantine for, what was it, 10 days? 10 days, was it 10
10
or
to
14?
14. 14, I
14
think. Yeah.
days. They had the flight, and somebody on the flight had COVID and had to quarantine, very much changing up their rhythm. Many players didn't get the type of training that
Yeah.
they would generally get for a Grand Slam. So I just think, I'm very happy to see that, we're despite the COVID situation, despite so many players being in quarantine before the tournament, still being able to have a very high quality event, and also to just from a fan's perspective, great to see a somewhat full crowd, and hopefully we can get there in the U.S. and elsewhere around the world. I think it's a testament to how Australia has handled COVID and everything. But no, definitely from a sports psychology perspective, I think a lot of important themes that we touched on, both on the men's and on the women's side. Really liked a lot of those quotes that you brought up, Brian. And yeah, definitely a fascinating tournament. And I think the next time when we do the French Open recap in a few months, we'll see what happens with Rafa. We'll see what happens with Swiatek. Our last recap before this, the French Open recap, where we talked about both of those champions. I think they, as we talked about then, they have a lot in common, despite their age difference, despite some of the other differences. But in terms of the mental side, in terms of their mentality, definitely a lot in common. So definitely eagerly looking forward to that tournament as well.
Yeah, and it should be good. Spring season leading into Roland Garros. So great. Well, that's our show for today, everyone. Thank you for listening. For more on today's show, please check out the show notes. If you have any feedback or questions for me and Josh, please email us at tennisiqpodcast@gmail.com. You can also use the Twitter hashtag tennisiq. Additionally, please subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice, which also includes YouTube, so that you can be notified of new episodes. You can check out our Instagram page, which also has new episode notifications. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon in our next episode.